Good afternoon and welcome to our statewide model programs of study overview. Today we are so excited to showcase our new drafts and also talk about some edits that we've done for education. So today what we're going to do is really have a welcome from our team at Ed Systems and also ICCB, give a bit of a background on our model program of study guides, talk briefly about our policy alignment and the role of our advisory committee. Then we're going to go through the steps of our mapping process as a whole. And then we're going to take a deep dive into our two new guides, Culinary, Arts, and Hospitality, and also Human and Public Services. But then we're going to go through a review of some of the updates that we've done to our education guide. And then we'll pause for like some questions, feedback, and then some next steps. A couple of quick notes is that we highly encourage the Q&A in the chat box. And also please note that this webinar is being recorded and we will send out the recording shortly after the webinar ends. So now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Janelle to give us a welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Janelle Washington, Director for Career and Technical Education at the Illinois Community College Board. And I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, which again is the overview of the new guides for culinary arts and hospitality and human and public services. Also the overview of the revised guide for education, which is really a demonstration of, how these how programs of study work. There's continual revision to make them the best. So we here at ICCB are grateful to partner with Ed Systems as they facilitate this very timely work around programs of study. Many of my post-secondary colleagues have been working very hard to develop and submit programs of study to ICCB for approval per the Perkins 5 reauthorization, which requires that program of study meet the state's definition of size, scope, and quality. So these model program of study guides are extremely important because they serve as exemplars to adopt or modify your local programs of study, especially in terms of the secondary to post-secondary connection. So thank you to Ed Systems, as always, for your continued partnership and for your leadership of the model program of study work. I would also like to thank all the individuals who participated on the advisory committees for the latest guides. The robust membership of the advisory committee demonstrates the stakeholder representation and engagement that's necessary to develop and improve quality programs of study at the local level. So I encourage you to reach out to Ed Systems with any questions you may have about the model program study guides and how they can be implemented in your own work at the local level, as they are happy to assist. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Megan.
Thank you so much, Janelle. Also, I'm so thankful for you all dropping your name and your title and your organization in the chat. If you could continue to do that so we can kind of get an understanding of who's all in the room, because we want to get to know you all as well. Again, my name is Megan Mitchell. I'm the Pathway Manager at Ed Systems. I'm going to allow for my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Juan Gonzalez. I'm the Pathways Director for Education Systems Center. Been working on this project now with ICCB for about 3 years. So glad to be back at it once again.
Thank you, Juan. So who is Ed Systems, right? So we are an organization that is affiliated with Northern Illinois University. And so our main goal is to shape and strengthen education workforce systems, primarily to advance racial equity and prepare more young people for productive careers in the global economy. And so we do that through 3 different project spaces. So college and career pathways, bridges to post-secondary, and also data, impact, and leadership. And so our main goal is to be statewide, which we are, to have various community networks and to be innovators in this space. And so now I'm going to go through a background of our model programs of study. I'm going to kind of peruse through this because I think it's important for us to take a deep dive into our guides, and then we'll pause. And if you have any questions on this part, we can address that as well. And so why do we develop these guides? And so the primary focus of these guides is to provide guidance for local programs to customize or adopt, or to develop programs to study as a part of their Perkins 5 plan. And so a couple of things that are important is that we identify priority dual credit and early college courses that are foundational to an industry area, and also are situated for statewide scaling and articulation. Next, we define competencies that should be sequenced across a program of study and that prepare students to work in a particular area. And then lastly, we think critically about various entry points for employers to support coursework and related work experiences. Other things that are important is that these guides are intended for high school faculty and staff working in pathways, community colleges, faculty staff. That includes academic deans, department heads, early college liaisons, et cetera. And then of course, our education for employment system directors. And so what you see here is a framework. This is the college and career pathway endorsement framework. And so this pretty much identifies what good pathways look like in our state. And so in this moment, I'm gonna have a focus on the little squared box here at the bottom. And so our goal is to make sure that our model programs of study, or our pathways, are career focused, right? And that they are supporting students to get at least 6 credit hours of early college before graduation. And then other things that are important is that we recommend that students are ready for non-remedial courses before graduation or upon graduation, particularly in reading and math. And so huge shout out to our advisory committee. I see some of you have joined us today, which is great. Feel free to, validate some of the things that I'm talking about in this moment. If there are questions that you see in the chat box that you feel confident answering, I welcome you all to do that as well. So our advisory committee, they really provide expertise in this field as well. So they give us guidance on trends in the industry that may not be reflected in our market data information. They give us insight on what's happening on the ground in terms of credentials, degrees, and emerging positions in different sectors. And then they help validate our research. They say, hey, this is great, you're on the right path, or hey, this is not the direction that we should be going in, which is important because we want to make sure that our guides are robust and providing the most accurate information possible. Other decisions that they've made or participated in is mapping course sequences, identifying strategic college courses, and then helping us identify competencies. And so what you see here is a full list of our advisory committee in culinary arts and hospitality. So kudos to all of the people listed here. We could not have done this great work without you. That is the same for our Human and Public Service Advisory Committee as well. Again, we're so thankful for all the time, energy, and hard work that you all have put in to making these guides with us. So thank you. And so as Juan mentioned in his introduction, we've been at this work for quite some time now. And so you see, a progression of the guides that we've created from 2020 up until now, 2022. And so we're excited of this. We are excited to showcase this work, and we're happy to share it with you all as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and talk through our mapping process and how we create these guides in general. And so it's pretty much a 5-step process that generally takes about 6 months to complete. And so in this moment, I'm going to go through each of these processes here and talk a little bit about it in detail. So how do we identify high priority occupations and promising credentials? So a high priority occupation is defined as an occupation with positive growth outlook and whose salary is near or greater than the living wage of one adult and one child in Illinois. And so we use the US Department of Labor data for Illinois and also the MIT Living Wage Calculator to help us generate this type of data. A promising credential is a degree or a college certification that either immediately prepares a student for a high priority occupation. And so we focus on credentials that are typically within community colleges. And so a credential may be a clear precursor, or it may be a stackable credential. So for example, that we always use is like a CNA role, right? And so, well, now in the past, CNA roles were roles that did not provide a living wage. However, many CNAs go on to be nurses, which is indeed a high priority occupation. So we're going to talk about how we identify strategic community college courses. And so what we do is we take a sample of many different colleges throughout the state of Illinois, and then we engage in what we call a desk research. And so we research all of the programs within that particular sector. And the next step is we tally up the courses in each program from each individual community college throughout the states. And then we review those courses that appear most common within the degree program that are highly accessible for dual credit and have the potential for transferability throughout the state, or have an industry credential. And so this is just a snapshot of what that process looks like. So it's generally like a huge spreadsheet. We use CCC, City Colleges, as an example, their business and finance program. And so you'll see all of the courses on one side, and then you'll see the various programs as well. This is that same document, just a little bit zoomed in. And so next, I'm going to talk about how we map from secondary to post-secondary. And so a couple of things that we lean into is, again, as I stated before, is we want to encourage students to take 6 or more career-focused credit hours before high school. We often keep open the possibility for unique opportunities like work-based learning or a capstone course or experience. Then we also consider the typical teacher or faculty credential, as well as the course delivery or approval process. One thing that we found that was very beneficial during COVID is that courses were able to be taught virtually, and that was extremely beneficial for access to some of these courses for our students. Most importantly, we want to make sure that we create a sequence that is going to accelerate a student and move them to and through a particular program a little bit quicker. And then, of course, we recommend sequences in general education subject areas that include early college and AP supplements. Lastly, we define related technical competencies. And so when we do this process, we research different courses that are not currently recognized by Illinois Articulation Initiative, and that, of course, can be easily accessed for early college at the secondary level, and that may have multiple credentials and or are within a particular area. And so what we do is we reach out to various community colleges and we look at the courses, and we go ahead and request their syllabi. And then we take a deep dive into those objectives and outcomes and use those as a framework to help us create competencies that we share widely. Any questions about that? If you have questions, you can feel free to drop it in the Q&A or in the chat box, and we will address it. And so now we're going to talk about our culinary arts and hospitality. And so what you see here is a diagram. And so we're gonna go through each of these individually, but this is just a snapshot of what we're gonna talk through more specifically. And so what you see here is when we talk about how we select high priority occupations. And so you'll see that there are two various programs or tracks. There's the culinary arts and also the hospitality track. And then we research the typical jobs. And then you'll see if this position meets our wage threshold, the annual wage, annual job opening, and then growth. And then lastly, if this role is stackable. And so when we look at culinary arts, you'll see cook and baker here. And so you may be questioning like, well, why is there an in there, right? If it doesn't meet the threshold, why is it listed? And so these roles are listed because these roles are entry-level roles or precursors into more lucrative roles like head cook and chef or food service manager. So oftentimes people or students who enter into this field as a cook or a baker pretty much progress into more lucrative roles. And that's similar with hospitality in terms of like the travel agent and then also the sales manager. And so travel agent doesn't quite meet our threshold. However, travel agent is a role that now is becoming, or the trend is that it's moving more into a sales position. And so sales manager has been listed in here because it has a pretty high wage, but that has become the new trend for travel agents. And so now what you see here is our post-secondary options. And so I want you to pay attention to the little check mark with the circle. So that indicates a industry credential. And so one thing that's important to know for culinary arts is that there is a wide range of industry credentials that a person can get that can move them forward in their career or are a requirement to even step foot into a kitchen or into a restaurant establishment to be able to work. And so these credentials are obtained either during a program or even before a student or a person starts to work. And so within culinary arts, there are two certificate programs that are listed here, culinary arts certificate and also baking and pastry arts. Both of these lead into a culinary arts AAS and then can progress into a bachelor's of arts. Hospitality management certificate program moves into two tracks, right? There are various specialty programs throughout the state that we saw emerge often, which were event planner, restaurant management, travel and tourism, and then a basic hospitality management, AAS, and a Bachelor of Science. One thing that I want to note is that hospitality management was uniquely positioned at some institutions within or provided heavily business courses. So it may, for a four-year degree, it may be in the School of Business as a concentration, or oftentimes there may be overlap with business courses associated with that particular program. And so here you'll see our course mapping. And so in terms of orientation, introduction from 9th and 10th grade, you'll see that there's much overlap, and the courses that we have here are Exploration of Hospitality Careers or Culinary Occupations 1. And then we have food safety and sanitation listed as a dual credit course. And so one thing I want you to pay attention to are the symbols there along the bottom. And so food safety and sanitation is pretty important because, again, that is a certification that is pretty much a requirement through SafeServe for those who are interested in going into the cooking field. So we encourage students to and colleges to provide that as an option. One thing that we found that was pretty interesting is that sometimes that course was offered as a course itself. Sometimes that certification was offered or embedded into a particular course or curriculum. And then there were other moments where it was just a requirement that the student will go take the certification and then come back and start the program or start employment. And then moving along into the skills development piece here for grades 9th through 12th, you'll see that we are encouraging culinary occupations too, for the culinary arts pathway, and then an introduction into culinary arts as a dual credit course. And then as you move into the 12th grade as a capstone or advanced courses, we want to introduce students into intro to hospitality management and or restaurant operations as dual credit courses, or students can take a course titled Restaurant, Food and Beverage Service Workplace Experience. And of course, workplace experience is always valuable, or a certificate in Prostart. And so Prostart is a national curricula that many institutions will adopt, either the whole curriculum itself or different pieces of it as well. And so we found this curriculum to be widely used and also extremely robust and aligned with many of the competencies that we have created in our guides as well. And then for the first year of college, we've outlined some courses that we think will be beneficial. Their intro to baking and cooking fundamentals. Intro, if you have not taken intro to culinary arts, that should definitely be taken. And then garde manger, excuse me if I don't pronounce that correctly. I know it's a French word, so forgive me for that. And then food safety and sanitation. And then as mentioned earlier, for hospitality, again, it's heavily business courses. So we have our intro to business or entrepreneurship as dual credit courses, intro to hospitality as a dual credit course, and or restaurant operations as a dual credit course. And then we have a course titled Hospitality, Tourism, and Workplace Experience. Then our recommended courses for the first year are really heavily leaning towards business courses like Intro to Business Management, Intro to Marketing, Intro to Business Entrepreneurship, then of course the Intro to Hospitality Management. And then, we encourage work-based learning, career explorations, apprenticeships, etc.
Megan, I just want to pause for a second to kind of address a question in the chat about at the high school level, students with special needs. So the college and career pathway endorsement simultaneously prepares students for career and for college. So it's not a one or the other choice, right? The college career pathway endorsement is specifically preparing you for an entry-level role and or an entry-level introduction to kind of a post-secondary degree or attainment in the industry sector. The endorsement does require that students earn early college credit in some capacity, either as dual credit, dual enrollment, AP, in order to earn the endorsement. And I think what we wanted to highlight in these career focus sequence around, and at least in the culinary arts pathway, the eligibility criteria for some of those courses suggested are such that students of all walks of life or all kind of capacities are going to be able to take those courses for early college credit. There's not going to be high levels of English language requirements, math placement requirements, or things of that nature, right? And if possible, what we also recommend is if courses can be combined with, so for example, in culinary occupations too, if possible, that the course competencies and curriculum should be aligned and kind of combined with the dual credit course of Introduction to Culinary Arts, such that you're kind of knocking out two birds with one stone at the high school level. So I hope that kind of facilitates understanding of the pathway endorsement and the kind of the beneficial aspects of dual credit for as many students as possible.
Thank you, Juan. I appreciate that. Next, I'm showing you what we suggest for general education courses. And so generally, if students take a science sequence and a social science sequence, that they normally would take. That's totally fine, but there are some recommendations that we have in terms of dual credits or AP for calculus and also English composition. And then we also note general education math, that can also be taught as a dual credit course. And also some of our courses that are affiliated with the Illinois Articulation Agreement as well in English composition and oral communication. Also, a special note, oral communication came up a bit in that course because this is a service field. And so we do recommend that students take that in their first year of college. And so here are our strategic dual credit course competencies. And so we have outlined them for food, safety, and sanitation, intro to culinary arts, and then intro to hospitality management.
Of note, also, we want to highlight that the courses for which we created course competencies are not currently available for I&I articulation. So there is no kind of standardization process for portability or kind of alignment other than what we are suggesting here. And we suggest that these competencies be aligned to potentially your college level course or your high school courses as well, so that there's some kind of level of standardization across the state.
I know it's a lot to read here, but please know that we're going to send this out as a recording along with the guides itself as well. Any questions about that, about our culinary arts hospitality? If questions linger, if you have any thoughts that pop up, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll go ahead and address it. But we'll keep moving forward and take a deep dive into our human and public service guide. And so again, this is a snapshot of our diagram, and we're going to go through each of these one by one. And so what you see here again is a list of our selected occupations in terms of our wages and job growth. So you already have an idea of how this works. So I'll just go ahead and dive into human and public service. And so you see, again, some of these roles do not meet our threshold for a living wage of 1 adult plus 1 child. However, these roles, as you can see, have substantial job growth and openings throughout the state, and they lead to more higher paying jobs within human and public services as well. And that's very similar when you look at the criminal justice field of dispatchers, right? That role also does not quite meet our threshold. However, again, it is a precursor to other roles that pay more or pay more of a living wage. And these roles typically do stack to various bachelor degree programs as well. And so one thing I do want to note that you see here is that we have not, so we've decided to move towards mapping to criminal justice and these roles within human and public services, although we know that the field of human and public services is extremely robust and has tons of various programs, but these are the programs that are more closely aligned. At one point, we entertained and put a lot of thought into adding fire science or EMTs into this. However, some of those roles do not require a degree program, and they don't typically align with the competencies of the programs that we have listed here. And so you'll see that we have 2 tracks, as I stated before, human and public services and criminal justice. We'll start with human and public services. And so one thing I want to note is that the CADC certification, there's an asterisk there, and the asterisk means that this particular certification can be obtained at many different points of a person's career trajectory, right? They can get it at the certificate program all the way up until the bachelor's degree and even beyond. And so there were multiple, I think over 18 different certification programs through Illinois Certification Association. But we've decided to map to this one, and there were a few that we've highlighted in our guide too that are emerging in the field. So I just want to pay a special note to that. And then also you'll see that there are many bachelor degree programs that a student could potentially obtain or map to from Human and Public Services. You have psychology, sociology, Human and Public Services itself, and then also social work. Criminal justice, we have the certificate program, but students are also able to move into an AAS or an AA program. And then there are degree programs in criminal justice as well for bachelor degrees. And so I'm gonna pause and let you all kind of look at this. Again, please pay special attention to the symbols below that are directly aligned with a particular course, because it will guide you on more of what that course is all about. And so when we take a look at our Human and Public Service piece, including social work for orientation and introduction, you will see that there are courses there in Introduction to Family and Consumer Science Careers, and then Work and Family Relationships. Then we are suggesting that the Human Growth and Development course be taken as a dual credit course. And then in terms of skill development, 10th through 12th, we have counseling and mental health, and then intro to social work as a dual credit course. And moving into advanced capstone, 12th grade, community protection, social problems and human services as dual credits. And that course is also affiliated with Illinois Articulation Agreement, and then an intro to human services as a dual credit course as well. And then we have our list of recommended courses for the first year, which are Intro to Human Services, Introduction to Social Work, Crisis Intervention, Psychology, and then Dynamic of Behavior. And then moving into our criminal justice track, for introduction orientation, there is a criminal justice course that we are recommending. And then moving into skill development, there is the Law Enforcement 1 or Intro to Criminal Justice as a dual credits, and or Public Safety. 12th grade, there's the Intro to Corrections or the Criminal Law and Procedure. Both of those are dual credit as well. But as you can see, the Intro to Corrections is affiliated with the Illinois Articulation Code. Then our recommendations for first year in college, of course, if they have not taken these courses, we're suggesting that they take constitutional law, introduction to criminology, and then juvenile justice. And then juvenile justice and introduction to criminology are both affiliated with Illinois Articulation Codes. And of course, we encourage students to, participate in work-based learning opportunities or apprenticeship or team-based challenges as well.
Megan, there's a question around kind of, because a lot of these pathways in Human and Public Services are customer facing, if there's any requirement or embedded customer service training or is that something a part of like something that will be embedded into a work-based learning experience? Is there anything that came up among the advisory committee about those aspects of competencies?
And so we have not talked and generally about a customer service program or customer service course, but there were some courses in terms of like learning more about human behavior, right? And so as you can see for our general education courses, we encourage in the social science sequence, like a psychology or a sociology course to kind of understand, you know, how people behave. I know that's not customer service per se, but it's taking a deep dive into how to deal with people, so to speak. And then there's a oral communication course in terms of how to effectively communicate that we recommend within the first year. And so we're recommending for science, a basic science sequence. Then again, as stated for social science, we encourage the US history, government and politics courses as either AP or dual credits. And again, as I stated before, the sociology and psychology courses, either in 12th grade or the first year of college. And then algebra and English are pretty straightforward there as well.
I also want to make note of something Sabrina mentioned around kind of some of the intro to human services courses have some of the learning objectives or some of the content involves interacting with clients or with humans, so that might be embedded in those courses. So maybe that's something to highlight in the course competencies when we get there. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thanks, Sabrina. I appreciate you, friend. Yeah, and so that is absolutely correct, right? Like when you look at our competencies, particularly around social work and even intro to human and public services, we have like client support, right? Or inclusion or even professionalism. And so these topics here are definitely like client facing, right? And include, you know, aspects of, you know, customer service and being able to address various people accordingly. We also, in terms of social work, encourage students to be able to understand and describe the National Association of Social Work Code of Ethics, right? And so within those Code of Ethics, there is a list of standards that we expect students to be able to describe, which are directly aligned with some of those customer service aspects as well. Again, I do know that there's a lot here, a lot of wording here, but please know that all of this will be emailed to you and that we anticipate a moment where you will be able to go in and complete a survey and give us feedback. And so we're going to show that survey a little bit later in the presentation here, but I just want to make that note. Again, if there are questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. Otherwise, we'll keep moving forward. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Juan to discuss the revisions to our education guide.
Thank you, Megan. So, you know, the education guide, education programs of study was first published, I believe, in the spring of 2020. There's been recent developments, namely the passage of a legislation in 2021 called the HB 2878, the Early Childhood Access Consortium for Equity Act. What it does is it primarily provides an increased level of transferability between associate's degrees in early childhood and bachelor's degrees of early childhood, right? So, you know, specifically anyone who is now able to complete at a community college an associates of applied science in early childhood and a Gateways Level 4 credential will be deemed eligible for transfer for a bachelor's degree of early childhood at any state university program that has an early childhood program. More specifically, it also allows those students to transfer in as with junior level status and without having to take any coursework that they have done forth in the past. This kind of law is effective immediately, and I think there's a lot of kind of work in the Early Childhood Consortium to streamline these processes for students who might be seeking to transfer. Next slide. The implications of this legislation, though, were far-reaching for our programs of study. Prior to this legislation, our programs of study kind of suppressed or diminished the value of early childhood education coursework. The reason being is that there was a limited level of transferability for that coursework, and most of the kind of higher paying jobs in the education space involve the attainment of a bachelor's degree and kind of access to public level kind of educational systems, right? But as a result of this legislation, someone can now more feasibly and more easily kind of continue their education at the post-secondary level in a community college, earn kind of a gateways level credential and an associates of applied science, and then relatively now easier kind of transfer the degree to a bachelor's degree in early childhood and get a similar access to the pool of jobs that would come with a bachelor's degree. So this had a domino effect on kind of what are the high priority occupations, what are the promising credentials, and as a result, what are the early college courses that would be impacted for a pathway at the high school level. Next slide. So one of the things that we're seeing here is that what you're seeing currently on your screen, I believe, is the old model programs of study guide. And I think if we click to the next slide, you will see now, I will kind of show you the new guide and the new component parts of this with more specificity as well. So this is the new guide. It's not a significant or high difference, but I will break down kind of where the major differences lie for kind of reference and use for you all. Next slide. So this is kind of the old guide and the old occupations that were listed with it. There was this notion of an AA in early childhood education, and the kind of there was this notion that AAS degrees only transferred at certain and select universities. Next slide. What you see here now is a big change that all AAS degrees in early childhood are now widely transferable to all public universities with a bachelor's degree in early childhood education. There's now this notion that with an AAS in early childhood education, you are also eligible to become kind of the manager of a preschool or childcare center, which also leads you to kind of a living wage job in addition to the more traditional roles of kind of elementary or secondary school teacher or special education teacher as well. Next slide. This is the old kind of pathways diagram. You see there's even mistakes in this pathways diagrams around kind of what gateways level credentials you can earn at the top of the slide. As we suggested, we implied that there was access to a gateways level 3 or 4 with an AAS, and that was incorrect. Next slide. Now, and what we see here now is a much more streamlined kind of pathways, specifically a pathway guided transfer for elementary and secondary education, which is a little more traditional and a little more kind of typical of students, but now there's a greater streamlined kind of focus and opportunity for students in early childhood, right? Where they go in, get an early childhood certificate, progress to an early childhood gateways credential, and kind of now naturally lead to the bachelor's in early childhood, both of which could lead, depending on university, to a professional educator license. Next slide. This is a kind of a representation of our old model programs of study coursework. As you can see, there's a huge emphasis on courses that would lead to transferability or to a bachelor's degree in education. Next slide. And now what we've been able to do is, because of the transferability of early childhood courses, we are now more comfortable creating a dual track aspect for students, so that students, if they chose to specialize in either traditional education or early childhood education in high school, some of the courses and the inclusion of early college credit for those courses makes more sense, will progress a student towards a promising credential, and is something that we included, right? So in the top row of your screen, you see in the career focus coursework, the intro education and or educational methodology, which was listed in our previous program of study, which then built towards a course called diversity in education, which is typically offered in many community colleges. What you're seeing here now different is the addition of a new early childhood track. What we recommended is that students start taking either for dual credit or early college credit, a course typically available in many gateways credentials at community colleges called health, safety, and nutrition, or any other course that a student could take that would align to a gateways level 2 credential, kind of having students introducing to those courses as early as sophomore or junior year for dual credit. We feel strongly about making those recommendations because the eligibility of the English language requirements for those courses were sufficient that many students would have access to them. But we also recommended in the capstone or senior year that students, if possible, should try to take child growth and development. as a dual credit course. Now, child growth and development is an II course. So the human capital needed to teach that course for dual credit is going to be a little more limited at a typical high school. And that course is going to many times often have higher eligibility requirements for students. But we wanted to include that course for recommendation here because if possible, either through a dual enrollment or a hybrid enrollment, hybrid kind of early college credit, if that student is able to take that course in their early childhood pathway while in high school, they're really setting themselves up for long-term success. And these programs of study are all about accelerating students towards their industry field. So we felt strongly about keeping that course here and recommend it in some capacity if your district or partnership is able to swing that. Next slide. The other thing we wanted to highlight here, this is the old program of study general education courses. You know, there wasn't really anything too sexy about this, but I want to highlight now in the next slide is that while we wanted to emphasize as a part of general education, the inclusion of a foreign language sequence if a student has the capacity and ability to earn the Illinois State Seal of Biliteracy by the time they graduate high school. In our previous guide, this was embedded into the career focused coursework section, but we've moved it down to this sequence. And we essentially want students to earn a State Seal of Biliteracy because then that would open opportunities for them for bilingual education, which is also of a high need in our state and a real shortage of bilingual education teachers, right? If possible, we still recommended transitional English or English composition and or oral communication by their first year of college, as courses central to kind of the teaching profession and kind of moving students along. We also, in the social science, heavily recommended the use of psychology, either as an AP course or dual credit, because that is commonly required in many bachelor's degree programs in education and or in AAS programs as well. So this has kind of been our latest on the new development on the early childhood model programs of study or kind of education model programs of study. And this guide is now open for feedback as well, as long as the other guides would. And Megan is going to talk to us a little bit about kind of the feedback process for these programs of study as well.
I want to pause here. We have a question from Tara Driver. And her question is, now that this legislation has passed, do you know if there's a grandfathering process for students who previously earned these credentials? Like, would they be eligible for a BA degree status with the inclusion of work experience?
That's actually a really excellent question and something that I don't know the answer to, right? I welcome some of the folks from our community college spaces who might be on the call who might have a hint of that kind of information, but that's something where I could also look into and get that information back to you, Tara. I would have to kind of more directly go to the real experts in this field which are the early child advocates who've really been leading on this regards as well.
Okay, so sorry if you don't get a response, what we'll do is we'll note this question and then follow up and get back to you individually at a later date. Thank you, Juan, for your response. I appreciate that. All right, so now I want to take a moment, to get some feedback here. And so if there are any thoughts that are still circling your mind, a thought or concept that squares your thinking, or 1, 2, or maybe 3 takeaways that you'd like to share, we invite you to go ahead and drop that in the chat box now. Again, something that's still circling your mind if you're still questioning a concept. If there is a concept or idea that squares your thinking, or up to 3 takeaways that you'd like to share, if you want to drop that in the chat box, that'd be great. And so think about that. And if there are things that pop up that you have questions about, we'll hang out for a little bit at the end of the presentation to be able to engage in a dialogue with you all about those things. And so here's where we want to get your feedback. And so right now, these guides are posted, particularly the hospitality, culinary arts, hospitality, and human and public services, on our website, and they're going to go through a 90-day or 60-day comment period. And so if you have a smartphone and you want to toggle your smartphone across the QR code, our survey will come up. And so we want to know how you feel about this, right? Like, are there things that we're missing? Are there concepts or thoughts that we need to include? Are there particularly or particular occupations that we need to reconsider or think about, or tracks that we need to add in human and public services? We want to know that, and you all are the experts, right? And so if you could complete this survey, that would be greatly appreciated. Again, if you need time to think it through, that's okay too, because all this will be emailed out to you for feedback at a later date as well. But one thing, the ask that I have is that you share this with your networks, with your colleagues, so that way we can make sure that we are putting out the most beneficial, valuable information that we can to our students and to our stakeholders. And so that pretty much concludes our presentation today. I will keep this slide up so that you can continue to toggle your phones across the QR code, or so that you can get the survey itself. But we will hang back for a moment, and if there are any questions that you have that you want to drop in the chats, we'll be able to address them. So we'll hang out, but other than that, thank you so much for joining.
I want to highlight for those that also that are kind of our 60-day comment period really influenced the guide's final kind of publication, right? So we look at that feedback, we follow up with individual respondents, sometimes go back to our advisory committee kind of with some of the feedback we receive, and then kind of publish final guides shortly after the end of the comment period. So maybe like around a month or two after, as we integrate all that feedback. So it's highly encouraged for you all to kind of submit feedback yourself and encourage college. It is very valuable to us, and we take it very seriously.